Welcome to our brief presentation on FERPA, COPPA, and SEPA by
Angela Acuña,
Crystal Herrera.
And Ulises Cisneros.
FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. FERPA is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. The student grades can only be released to the student, and FERPA requires students to sign a release form if the student wishes to grant consent to a professor or someone else to have access to his educational records. Students' educational records or academic performance cannot be discussed in an informal setting. Teachers cannot discuss a student's academic records with another professional unless the student signed a release form to grant consent or a legitimate reason exists. Why is it in place? FERPA is in place to protect student privacy. How can an organization become or stay compliant? All schools that receive funds under an applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education must be in compliance with FERPA. There are a few ways to be compliant. Staying informed and up to date with the law is one way. With technology changing all the time, the law is constantly being updated to reflect changes in the way student records are kept, whether it is digital or in a paper format. When we reflect on our own practices, that's another way of ensuring that we remain compliant. Ignorance of the law cannot be an excuse, and now that we are informed, we need to make a conscious effort and not disclose specific names of students with colleagues when discussing cases in search of solutions. Our IT department must constantly make sure that our students' digital data cannot be compromised or hacked into. An online source called Docfinity also recommended that we document our efforts. Keep a log of the steps you take to ensure compliance with FERPA. Documenting your practices will allow you to reflect on whether or not you are in compliance and make any necessary adjustments. Poway Unified School District has FERPA waivers, which allow students to waive their right to read letters of recommendation that are written for them when applying to college. Universities will place more weight on letters that they know students did not have access to. Lakeside Union School District provides families with an annual notification on what FERPA is and how it protects students. And Chula Vista Elementary School District provides families with an authorization for use or disclosure of health information to and from school districts. If you'd like to learn more about FERPA, please click on these links. Ulises Cisneros will now shed some light on a Privacy Act referred to as COPPA and how it protects students.
Thank you, Crystal. So I'll be talking to you about COPPA. First of all, what is it? What is COPPA? Well, COPPA stands for Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and this was something that was implemented by the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission. And what it does, it outlines how data is collected from users of the age of 13 and under, and it talks about how most operators that gear towards the children of that age must clearly display privacy policy, notify parents, and get a verifiable consent from parents about the data being gathered of their students. So why is it in place? So why is it in place? The reason why is that it ensures that parents remain in control of the data collected about their children, or in other words, their kids' privacy. And it obviously encompasses websites, online services, apps, and within these apps, it also encompasses third-party analytics plugins. And this law was first implemented in April 21st of the year 2000. and was not updated until fairly recently, which was July 1st of 2013. And the update added mobile devices and geolocation, uh, photos, videos, and audio of children that would incorporate this data gathering with privacy. So again, notifying parents and being able to notify that they're using these ways to gather information about their children. So moving on to compliance. Now, schools do not fall under the COPPA Act because they don't generally gather information for or data from their students for commercial use. It's it's geared towards just education and for guiding instruction and other educational purposes, and not obviously for commercial use. So what it does, who it does apply to is the for-profit sites that collect personal data of children, like I said, of the age of 13 and under, and it actually supports the way these companies stay compliant is that they must post a noticeable link uh, that gives information on practices on its homepage, and it has to be clearly identifiable. In other words, it can't be some tiny little print at the bottom of the page. It has to be somewhere clearly identifiable by the parent so that they are aware of the information being gathered. So what this notice has to show is the name of the company, the kinds of personal information that is being collected, how it's used, uh, whether it's disclosed to other parties, and it should let parents know that they can opt out, and it should also let parents know that they can also view information that was gathered of their children, and they have the right to ask to delete that information. And how do these operators go about making sure that they notify parents? Well, one of the ways is email. They receive through email, post mail, electronic scan, which was something that was implemented in the update that was done in 2013, a video conference, another update, government ID, and an alternative paying system. So these are the things that they must notify the parents so that the parents are aware of what their data that's being gathered of their children. Again, back to the reason why why it's being done is so that they are in charge of what's collected, and that they decide whether they are allowing this company or this for-profit operator to collect this data on their students or their children. This is some places where you can find more information. The Federal Trade Commission is a great source. It actually is very easy to read and gives you a breakdown of what COPPA is and how it's implemented and the updates. And it actually gives you some updated information on things that have been happening. Then there's a middle one where I included the FTC COPPA info for specifically for schools, and it gives you information on how it applies to schools, because one would assume that because we use certain vendors that we would have to follow COPPA rules, but again, we are not monitoring that. The vendors or the operators are the ones that are supposed to be monitoring that. And the last one is the Children's Online Privacy website that also helps parents inform themselves more about how they can protect their children online and what their rights are and how they go about making sure that the websites that their children are safe and that they are being COPPA compliant. And the last thing I wanted to point out of the middle link is that I was scrolling down and I was able to notice that they had a nice debate going on about whether certain companies that do serve schools that are for profit and how these companies should be held under COPPA. They should be held to implement COPPA because they are for profit, even though they are geared towards education. At the same time, they're still gathering data to gain profit. So it was a nice little discussion and a nice little update about whether these companies like Pearson and other companies that are big companies that are making a lot of money, whether they should be compliant of COPPA. And lastly, we're going to have Angela go ahead and present SIPA.
Thank you, Lises. Um, I'm going to talk about SIPA. SIPA stands for Children's Internet Protection Act, and it was enacted by Congress in 2000, in the year 2000. SIPA requirements are, SIPA requires all schools and libraries to use filters and measures to prevent children in K through 12 from being exposed to harmful contents as a condition to receive E-rate funding for technology. Now, E-rate funding is a universal service fund that helps schools and libraries to pay for hardware, internet access, and telecommunications. With the help of my partners, we came up with this visual that kind of explains the overall idea of SIPA. On the top, we have the E-rate funds that are funding or willing to fund schools or libraries as long as they put something in place to filter and prevent students or children from ages K through 12 from being exposed to inappropriate materials while they're working on the internet. And in exchange, they benefit by getting technology funding and overall to have a safe internet experience for these children. How can an organization become or stay compliant? E-rate funding imposes certain requirements on schools and libraries, which may be all summarized under 4 categories. The first one, um, the schools and libraries need to make sure that they block or filter the materials that are going to be seen on their devices so that the children are not exposed to obscene or harmful materials when they're on the web. Another category is to monitor the children's online activities. Somehow the schools and libraries need to come up with some kind of way to monitor and be and make sure that when the kids are online, they're not looking at materials that they're not supposed to. The third one is to adopt and implement an internet safe policy. They have to have a policy in place before they let the students have access to the internet. And the last one, which I think is the most important of all, is to make sure that they educate the students about cyber citizenship and that they know how to behave online to prevent and avoid situations such as cyberbullying. At last, we have more information sites, more information that can be viewed on this site. The first one is a SIPA compliance checklist. I found it was kind of a practical way to gather the what is needed to be granted the E-rates for technology. The second one is the E-rate application tips. It talks about ways to apply for the E-rate fund, and it guides people from the beginning, and it has links to the actual forms that need to be filled in order to submit their request. And the last one, we have the new E-rate requirements, which is kind of an update of the original requirements, and it also has more information about each one of the requirements that are asked from schools and libraries.
Thank you, Angela. So now we've had discussions that we've been working together on this project, and as a group, we came to the consensus that these acts serve to honor, respect, and protect data gathering on children. Thank you very much. That concludes our presentation.